I want to tell you something I haven't told many people, and the ones I did tell, mostly wished I had kept it to myself. My name is Dustin Sutton. I am 66 years old. I spent 28 years driving rural mail routes for the post office out of the Clayfield substation in Harlan County, Kentucky, and I know that stretch of road called Gentry Road better than I know the layout of my own house. I know where the frost heaves split the asphalt in late November. I know which ditch runs brown after a hard rain and which one stays clear. I know whose dogs will bark and whose dogs will only watch. 28 years of the same roads, the same mailboxes, the same turns, the same trees. That kind of familiarity gets into you like a smell. You stop noticing it, which means you stop fearing it. That was probably my first mistake. I retired 3 years before any of this happened. 63 years old, a small pension, a pickup truck that needed a timing belt, and a black lab named Pepper, who had about as much ambition as I did by that point. We were a matched pair, Pepper and me. She was 9 years old, and her muzzle had gone gray, and she moved slow in the morning, same as I did, and we had a routine that suited us both. Coffee, a short walk, out to the end of the driveway, back inside, the noon news on low, while I ate a sandwich at the kitchen table. She slept at the foot of my chair. That was enough. I had decided that was enough. My brother Earl called on a Thursday in the first week of September. Earl is 3 years younger than me, does odd jobs and small repairs for people across the county, and he has never in his life asked a favor without framing it like he is doing you a good turn for accepting. He had a parcel that needed to go out to Ray Givens, who lives past the 4th house on Gentry Road. And Earl could not make the drive himself because he was pulling out a section of fence line for a family over in Bledsoe Hollow, and the job was running past dark. The parcel was a small engine part Ray had ordered through Earl, something for a riding mower, and it could not wait until morning because Ray needed it to get the mower running before the weekend, and would I mind just dropping it off? It was only a few miles. I used to drive it every day. I told him I would do it. That is the whole of the decision. No hesitation, no particular thought. I used to drive it every day. That was the logic. The route was so ordinary to me that the idea of anything going wrong on it would have struck me as absurd, the way it would strike you as absurd to imagine something going wrong while you were brushing your teeth. Gentry Road was nothing. I had driven it in snow, in ice, in the kind of September rain that turns the culverts into white water. I had driven it with a coffee thermos, balanced between my knees, and the radio on low, and not a thought in my head beyond whether the Givens box was full again. The idea of being afraid on Gentry Road was the kind of thought I would have laughed at, and I want to be clear about that. I was not a man who frightened easily, and the specific place where I would eventually be afraid was a road I had considered mine. I loaded Pepper into the cab around 5:30 in the afternoon, the engine part sitting in a cardboard box on the passenger seat. The day was warm for September, the kind of warm that still carries summer in it, the light going yellow and long across the fields. Pepper settled herself against the door, nose working the window gap. She loved truck rides the way she had always loved them, her whole body oriented toward whatever was coming in through the glass. I backed out of the driveway and headed south on the county road toward the Gentry Junction. And I remember thinking there was nowhere I would rather be than exactly where I was. Retired, unhurried, driving a familiar road in the last good light of a September day. The delivery to Ray Givens took longer than it should have. Ray came out of the house in his work clothes, oil on his forearms, and he wanted to show me the mower and explain the exact nature of the problem before he would accept the part. I stood in his driveway and listened, because Ray Givens has been waiting for someone to ask him how something works for about 40 years, and it seemed unkind to rush him. By the time I got back to the truck, the light had gone. Not fully dark, not yet, but that blue-gray that comes in fast in September when you're not watching for it, the shadows filling in from the bottom of the tree lines, the sky still pale above and everything below it darkening. I should have noticed that. I noticed it, but I didn't let it change anything. I turned the truck around in Ray's gravel drive and headed back toward the Gentry Road junction. Pepper had been quiet during the visit, which was normal. She did not usually get out at stops she did not know. I had left the window cracked for her, and she had stayed put. And when I climbed back in, she was sitting upright in the passenger seat instead of lying down, which I noted but did not think about. The cab smelled like her, like the warm dog smell I had come to find as ordinary as the smell of my own coat. I put the truck in drive and rolled back out onto Gentry Road and started north toward home. The fourth house on Gentry Road belongs to a family named Burdett, though by that September the Burdett's had not lived there for about 2 years, and the place had stood empty since. The mailbox was still up, still had their name on it, though I had long since had that box pulled from my active route. I passed it without thinking, just the way I had passed it 10,000 times before, except that about 100 yards past the mailbox, Pepper pressed herself back against the door and made a sound I had not heard from her in 9 years of truck rides. It was not a growl. It was lower than a growl, and it came with a tremor, a vibration she seemed to have no control over, and she turned her head away from the passenger window and pressed it toward me, which she had never done. Pepper was a good truck dog. She watched the road. She did not turn away from the window. I slowed down. I looked at her for a moment and then looked out her window into the trees on the right shoulder. It was darker there than it had been a quarter mile back, the trees close, the undergrowth thick. I did not see anything. I told myself she had probably picked up a scent, a skunk maybe, or a groundhog in the brush, something that bothered her. She was 9 years old, and her senses were sharper than mine in some directions, and her reactions had always been large. I reached over and put my hand on her back, and she was vibrating like a wire. I told myself it was nothing and kept driving. Then I noticed the quiet. I want to try to explain this correctly because it is the thing people always get wrong when I try to tell it. They think I mean it was quiet the way a room is quiet. That is not what I mean. A warm September night in Harlan County is not quiet. It is full of sound in the same way a room is full of air. You do not notice it until it stops. Crickets, tree frogs, katydids, the distant sound of something moving in the creek bottom. That is the sound of a September night, and it had been there when I left Ray Givens's driveway. And I had not noticed it specifically because I did not need to, the same way you do not notice breathing. What I noticed was its absence. No insects, no frogs, nothing from the creek. The windows were cracked, and the warm air coming in was as silent as the inside of a building. I sat with that for a moment. I told myself a storm front could do it, a pressure change, though the sky through the windshield was clear with early stars, and there was no weather in the forecast. I told myself sometimes the bugs just go quiet. I had been on this road for 28 years, and I had never heard it do this, not once, not in any season, not even in the dead of winter when there was less to be quiet. But I told myself that anyway. Pepper had stopped vibrating. She was now absolutely still against the door, rigid, her eyes fixed on something through the passenger window that I could not see. I want to say something to you directly before I go further. If you have ever been out in the woods or on a back road at night and felt something change around you, something in the air itself that you could not name, I want you to leave a comment on this video, because I spent a long time thinking I was the only one who had felt it, and that loneliness was its own particular weight. I gave the truck more gas and kept my eyes on the road ahead. The headlights came on automatically, the truck had the sensor for it, and the light hit the road and the tree lines on either side, and I drove north, and I told myself I would be at the county road in 3 minutes. And this would be nothing. The road bent left at about half a mile, and then straightened, and on the right side of the bend sat Carl Weber's place. The old white house with the long fence line running back along his property toward the tree line. Carl kept goats. He had kept goats on that property for as long as I had been driving the road, and I had watched those goats from my mail truck window more mornings than I could count. The fence line was cedar post and page wire, posts every 8 feet. Each post about 4.5 feet high. I knew that fence the way I knew my own face. When the headlights came around the bend and lit the fence line, I saw a shape standing at the far end of it, where the cedar posts met the tree line. It was standing still. The fence posts gave me the scale immediately and involuntarily, the way your eyes make measurements before you tell them to. Whatever was standing at the end of Carl's fence was not 4.5 feet high. It was not 6 feet high. It was standing upright, two-legged, and its shoulder line was above the top strand of the page wire, and the page wire ran to 5 feet. I had enough time to register the width of the shoulders, the forward lean of the head, the way it stood with its weight forward like something that had paused in motion rather than something at rest. And then it was behind me. I kept my eyes on the road. I did not look in the mirror. I told myself it was a man. I told myself it was Carl himself, or one of Carl's grandsons, standing at the back of the property, looking for a goat that had gotten loose along the tree line. I told myself that. The fence post measurement sat in my head and would not let go. Carl Weber is a lean man, maybe 5'10", and the thing I had seen at the end of his fence would have looked down at Carl Weber. But I kept driving and I kept telling myself there was an explanation, and the explanation was a man at the back of a property at night. Something ordinary, something I had simply misjudged in the fast sweep of the headlights. Pepper made the sound again. The low, involuntary tremor. She had not moved from her position against the door. There is a pull-off about a 1/4 mile past Carl Weber's fence line on the left side of Gentry Road, where the county crew parks the mowing equipment in season. It is a gravel apron about 40 feet wide, bordered on the back by a drainage culvert running under the road, with old concrete head walls on either side that have been there longer than I have been alive. I used to pull in there on my route when I needed to eat lunch or check my delivery manifest. I had parked there hundreds of times. When my headlights swung across it, I saw that the gravel was clear, nothing parked, same as always. I was not planning to stop. My foot was on the gas and I was looking at the road ahead, and I should have kept going, and I do not know to this day why I did not. Maybe it was the engine. There was a sound in the truck, a rough idle, something I had been meaning to have looked at for weeks, and I thought for a second that I should pull off and make sure the temperature gauge was right. That is the reason I would give you if I had to give one. The gauge was fine. I pulled onto the gravel apron and stopped and looked at the gauge, and it was fine. Then the quiet came back. Not the absence of sound from outside, though, that was still there. This was different. This was the quality of the air inside the truck. The feeling that the truck itself had become very small and the darkness outside had become very large, and the headlights were pointing at the road and not at whatever was behind me. Pepper was pressed flat against the passenger door. She was not making a sound. She was not moving. Her eyes were fixed on the rear window of the cab. I did not want to look. I want to be honest about that. I was 66 years old, retired, sitting in a familiar pull-off on a road I had driven for 28 years, and I did not want to turn around and look out the rear window of my own truck. My hands were on the wheel, and I could feel my pulse in them. I told myself, you are going to look, and it is going to be nothing. It is going to be the trees and the dark and the road, and you're going to feel foolish and go home. I turned around and looked. It was standing at the edge of the gravel at the back of the pull-off between the two culvert head walls. The headlights did not reach it, but there was enough ambient light from the sky and the truck's interior that I could see the shape of it. Two-legged. Upright in a way that no bear stands upright when it is not performing, when it is not rising an alarm. A bear rears, and it is soft and it sways. This was not soft. The posture was forward and still and patient, the way a man stands when he is watching something and does not know he is watched in return. The head was carried low on the shoulders, tucked forward, and the shoulders themselves were wrong, wider than any man I had ever stood next to, and they caught what little light there was with a texture that was not cloth and was not bare skin. It was fur or something adjacent to fur, coarse-looking, shorter than a bear's coat in September. The legs were wrong. I have thought about how to say this for 3 years, and the only word I have is wrong. The joints didn't bend the way a man's joints bend. The lower leg carried a different angle, and it distributed the weight in a different place, so that the whole thing stood with a solidity that made me feel the ground under it in a way I could not explain. I could smell it. The windows were cracked, and I could smell it. And it was the smell of something very old and very wet and very much alive. Not carrion, not decay. Something organic and dense and close, in a way that told my body, before my mind had caught up, that I was not the largest thing in that pull-off. It did not move toward me. It stood and it watched me, and I watched it, and the only sound in the world was my own breathing, which I could hear very clearly because there was nothing else to hear. The eyes caught the light from the truck the way a dog's eyes catch headlights, that flat disk of reflected color, except the eyes were higher than any dog's eyes I had ever seen from a truck cab, higher than a man's eyes would be at that distance. And they were still. Animals in headlights move, they flinch, they blink, they shift. These did not move. They were fixed on me with a steadiness that I understood on a level I cannot make academic, as deliberate, as chosen, as something it was doing on purpose. I cannot tell you how long I sat there. My sense of time was gone. I remember that my right hand found the gear shift, and I put the truck in reverse without looking down, and I backed very slowly onto Gentry Road, watching the shape the whole time. It did not come forward. It did not make a sound that I could hear. It stood between those concrete head walls, and it watched me back onto the road. And when I put the truck in drive and rolled north, I watched the rear view mirror until the pull-off was out of sight, and the shape did not come to the road. It stood where it was. That was almost worse than if it had moved. I drove the rest of Gentry Road with both hands on the wheel and the windows up and the heat going, even though I did not need the heat, and I did not take my eyes off the rear view for more than a second at a time until I reached the county road and turned east toward home. Pepper sat rigid against the passenger door for the whole of the drive. She did not relax until I pulled into my own driveway and cut the engine, and even then she only shifted position. She did not get out of the truck easily. She stood on the seat and looked at the door when I opened it, and then she looked at me, and I had to reach in and put my hands around her and lift her out, which was something I had never done before and something she'd never allowed. The gray light came up around 5 a.m, and I was already awake and had been since I got home. I had not slept. I had sat in the kitchen with the overhead light on and the coffee maker going, and Pepper lying under the table with her chin on the floor instead of in the corner where she always slept. And I had gone over what I had seen in the pull-off on Gentry Road a sufficient number of times to know that it was not going to resolve into something manageable. I had tried the bear explanation. I had tried the man at the fence explanation. I had tried the combination of poor light and a tired mind, because 66 years old, because of September night, because the eye can be fooled and the mind will cooperate. None of it held. The smell held. The shoulder width held. The eyes held. I called Earl at 7 a.m. He answered on the third ring with the flat voice of someone who has already been working for 2 hours and does not need a phone call, complicating things. I told him what had happened on Gentry Road. I told him about Pepper refusing the window, about the silence, about the shape at the fence line and the shape at the culvert head walls. I told him about the smell. I told him about the eyes. Earl was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then he said he thought I had probably spooked myself on a dark road, that old dogs got strange after a certain age, and strange dogs made their owners strange, and that I should get some sleep and maybe have the doctor check my blood pressure next time I was in. I told him I had 28 years of that road in my memory, and I knew what did not belong on it. He said he did not doubt that I had seen something, but that something probably had an ordinary answer, and he had a fence line to finish. That was the end of that conversation, and it was the nearest thing to the end of my relationship with my brother for a while. Not a dramatic end, not a fight, just the specific cold of being told by the person you expected to take you seriously that the thing you saw with your own eyes was a trick of the dark and a tired mind. I have thought about that call more times than I care to count. Earl did not say anything cruel. He said what any reasonable person would say. That is the part that sticks. I drove out to Carl Weber's place that same morning around 8 o'clock. Carl was in his yard doing something with a section of gate hardware, his head down, and he looked up when I pulled in. Carl is a man of approximately 12 words per conversation, and I had always appreciated that about him, because on a mail route, you develop a quick read of who wants to talk and who wants you to put the mail in the box and leave. Carl was the latter. He had a narrow face and permanent squinting lines from 40 years of outdoor work, and he looked at me the way he always looked at me, without surprise, without welcome, without particular expression. I told him I'd been on the road last night and I'd seen something at the back of his fence line, at the tree line, and I wanted to know if he had lost a goat or had somebody on his property. He looked at me for a long moment, He looked at the gate hardware in his hand. He set it down on the fence post and he said, and these are the exact words he used, he said, "I don't go back there after dark anymore." That was all he said. He picked the gate hardware back up and turned it in his hands and looked at it. And he did not say anything else, and I did not ask him to. I thanked him and got back in the truck and drove home. There is a kind of relief in having a man like Carl Weber say a thing like that. And there is a kind of horror in it too, and I am not sure you can have one without the other. He did not tell me what he had seen. He did not describe anything. He confirmed nothing in terms I could take to anyone official. He just told me he had learned the same rule I had learned on the same stretch of road and had kept it without telling anyone until I walked into his yard and asked. Pepper never rode in the truck bed again after that night. She had always liked the truck bed in warm weather, the wind, the motion, and she would jump in when I dropped the tailgate without being asked. After that September, she would not go near the tailgate. She would go to the passenger door and wait, and she would ride in the cab with me, and that was the only way she would ride. She started sleeping inside the house at night, at the foot of my bed, which she hadn't done since she was a puppy. I let her. I didn't try to put her back in the kitchen. Whatever she understood about what had happened on Gentry Road, she had understood it before I had, and she had carried it in her body since that night. And I thought she had earned the right to sleep wherever she felt safe. She died 8 months after that night in May, with no particular cause the vet could pin down. She ate normally, moved normally, had no masses or organ failure that showed on the examination. She just slowed over 3 weeks and stopped eating and died on a Tuesday morning in the yard with the sun on her and her head resting on her front paws. The vet said sometimes old dogs did that, went quiet at the end without a traceable reason, and I nodded and thanked him. I didn't tell him about Gentry Road. I haven't driven that road after dark since that September. During the day it is still just a road. I go out there occasionally in the morning, around 9 or 10, when the light is full and the fields are bright, and it is the same road it has always been. The same frost heaves, the same tree lines, the same Carl Weber's white house with the goat fence running back toward the tree line. Ordinary in every visible way. I can drive that road in daylight and almost convince myself that the whole thing was what Earl said it was. A dark road and a tired mind and a dog who was already failing. Almost. The smell does not let me quite get there. The smell of the pull-off, the open windows, the thing that was standing between those culvert head walls and watching me back onto the road. I do not know what produces a smell like that. I have been around livestock, around hunting camps, around a lot of things that smell the way a living body smells, and I have not encountered anything before or after that night that produced what I smelled through those cracked windows. Dense and wet and ancient. The smell of something that does not clean itself because there is nothing in its world that requires it to. I also know what I measured against that fence line. And what I measured is not something that walks on 4 legs, and it is not a man, and I have no remaining category for it. 28 years on that road, every season, every hour of the morning. Whatever was standing at the end of Carl Weber's fence in the sweep of my headlights had been on that road longer than I had, and it had been there after dark the whole time, and I simply hadn't known it because I had always been heading home before the light went. Earl came by around Christmas that year. He came to help me with a section of gutter that had pulled away from the soffit over the back porch, and we worked on it for the better part of a morning without much conversation, which is its own kind of making up with Earl, the way he apologizes without saying the words. When we were done, he stood in the yard with his coffee and he asked me if I still thought about what I'd seen on Gentry Road. I told him I thought about it every day. He looked at the tree line at the back of my property for a moment, the same expression he gets when he is calculating something and does not like the number he is arriving at. Then he said he supposed there were things on back roads that did not have names, and that I knew that road better than anyone, and that he was sorry he had not said so on the phone. That was as far as it went. I did not press him. I was glad enough to have the words. I still have my mail carrier tote in the bed of that truck. It is a heavy canvas bag, Postal Service issue, tan with the eagle logo faded to near nothing, and I have had it for so long it has taken on the shape of the things that used to go inside it. I stopped using it when I retired, and I never took it out of the truck bed because there was never a particular reason to. Some things just accumulate in a truck bed over the years and become part of the truck. After Pepper stopped riding back there, the tote was the only thing in the bed, just sitting against the wheel well on the driver's side. Sometimes I go out to the truck in the morning and I look at it. Not for any reason I could explain cleanly. It is just the one thing I have that belongs to all those years on that road. The morning runs, the full light. The time before I knew what came out on Gentry Road after dark. It is faded and worn, and it smells like old canvas and dried rubber, and it has nothing to do with that night in September or with the thing I saw between the culvert head walls, except that it does the way everything from before does now. The before time and the after time sit on either side of one September night, and the tote is from the before time. And when I look at it, I feel both halves of my life at once, and I carry that. I do not drive Gentry Road after dark.